It was October 28th in the year 1965 that construction is completed on the Gateway Arch, a spectacular 630-foot high parabola of stainless steel marking the Jefferson National Expansion Memorial on the waterfront of St. Louis, Missouri. The Gateway Arch, designed by Finnish-born American-educated architect Erikson, was erected to commemorate President Thomas Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase of 1803 and to celebrate St. Louis's central role in the rapid westward expansion that followed. As the market and supply point for fur traders and explorers, including the famous Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, the town of St. Louis grew exponentially after the War of 1812, when great numbers of people began to travel by wagon train to seek their fortunes west of the Mississippi River. In 1948, Saarinen won a nationwide competition to design a monument honoring the spirit of the Western pioneers. In a sad twist of fate, the architect continued his eternity of a brain tumor in 1961 and did not live on Earth to see the construction of his now famous arch, which began in February of 1963. Completed in October of 1965, the Gateway Arch cost less than $15 million to build. With foundations sunk 60 feet into the ground, its frame of stressed stainless steel is built to withstand both earthquakes and high winds. An internal tram system takes visitors to the top, where on a clear day they can see up to 30 miles across the winding Mississippi and to the Great Plains to the west. In addition to the Gateway Arch, the Jefferson Expansion Memorial includes the Museum of Westward Expansion and the Old Courthouse of St. Louis, where two of the famous Dred Scott slavery cases were heard in the 1860s. Today, some 4 million people visit the park each year to wander its nearly 100 acres, soak up some history, and take in some breathtaking views from Saarinen gleaming arch. It was on October 28th in 1992 in Duluth, Minnesota, that Mayor Gary Doughty cuts the ribbon at the mouth of the brand new 1,480-foot-long Leif Erikson tunnel on Interstate 35. With the opening of the tunnel, that highway, which stretches 1,593 miles, was finished at last. As a result, the federal government announced the interstate highway system itself was 99.7% complete. In 1958, the Minnesota Highway Department proposed a highway to be paid for with federal interstate highway funds right through the middle of downtown Duluth. It would be elevated and run right along the Lake Superior shoreline. To build it, many downtown buildings, not to mention pedestrian access to the waterfront, would be eliminated. It would, the mayor said, be, quote, a facelifter and a solution to Duluth's downtown traffic problems, unquote. By the 1960s, freeways in cities across the country were growing less popular every year. Opponents argue that they destroyed homes and businesses, eviscerated poor neighborhoods, and made traffic congestion worse, not better. In Duluth, anti-road activists geared up for a fight. In 1970, a group called Citizens for Integrating Highways and the Environment began to argue that the waterfront was the city's biggest asset and that putting a huge expressway between it and downtown was a terrible idea. Meanwhile, a group called Stop the Freeway mobilized to do just that. Highway officials came up with a compromise. They would keep the road, but they would put it underground instead of on its stilts, and they would build a lakefront park on its lid. This cut-and-cover plan turned out to be a smashing success. The $220 million tunnel kept the disruption of the road to a minimum and provided city residents and tourists with an extremely pleasant place to go and relax. The month it opened, the tunnel won an Excellence in Highway Design Award from the Federal Highway Administration. People who once adamantly opposed the downtown freeway, like Superior Magazine explained, are now some of the same people who are responsible for its aesthetic appeal. Likewise, those who insisted that the freeway could be built in no other place in Duluth admit that citizen concern forced an admirable design that might not otherwise have been considered. A spokesperson for the Minnesota Department of Transportation summed it up, quote, "The great thing is that this was Duluthians deciding what was best for Duluth and then all working together to make it happen," unquote. It was October 28th in the year 1998 that our 42nd President Bill Clinton, signed the Digital Millennium Copyright Act into law. According to an ABC News report, it was none other than pop icon Prince himself who happened upon a 29-second home video of a toddler cavorting to a barely audible background soundtrack of his 1984 hit Let's Go Crazy, and subsequently instigated a high-profile legal showdown involving YouTube, the Universal Music Group, and a Pennsylvania housewife named Stephanie Lenz. Like the lawsuits that eventually shut down Napster, the case involved a piece of federal legislation that has helped establish a legal minefield surrounding the use of digital music in the age of the internet. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act bill was heavily supported by the content industries, Hollywood, the music business, and book publishers during its legislative journey through the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. The DMCA was written in order to strengthen existing federal copyright protections against new threats posed by the internet and by the democratization of high technology. Also included in the legislation, as it was eventually enacted, was a safe harbor provision granting companies operating platforms for user-contributed content protection from liability for acts of copyright infringement by those users. It was this provision that the operators of file-sharing platforms like Grokster and Napster tried to hide behind during their unsuccessful attempts to defend themselves against DMCA-inspired litigation in the early 2000s. The DMCA explicitly authorized copyright holders to issue takedown notices to individuals or companies believed to be engaging in infringing use of a copyrighted work. The allegation of infringing use in the case of the Let's Go Crazy toddler came from Universal Music Group, acting in its capacity as Prince's music publisher in June of 2007, and YouTube responded by immediately removing the offending video along with roughly 200 other also deemed by Universal to be in violation of the law. Stephanie Lenz appealed YouTube's takedown of her home video on the basis that the barely audible Prince clip conformed with the long-established doctrine of fair use. The video was restored when Universal failed to file a formal infringement lawsuit against Lenz within 2 weeks. The information documented and divulged on this audio file can be verified on history.com.